Og med dette så erklærer vi Norkast for offisielt oppjekka.
Yo, 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 yo!
Velkommen til Norkast episode 1. Hjemmebryggerorganisasjonen Norbryggs egen podcast for hjemmebryggere. Det urpremiere, og som alle hørte ble den offisielt åpnet av vår egen leder i Norbrygg, Eivind Busengdal. Vi skal fortsette å snakke litt med han, før vi går over på et intervju som vi har gjort med Jamil Zainasheff, som egentlig ikke trenger noen nærmere presentasjon. Formann i Norbrygg, hjemmebryggerorganisasjonen i Norge, Eivind Busengdal. Skal vi begynne litt med å snakke litt om hva Norbrygg ser for seg i forhold til Norkast?
Ja, vi ønsker jo å komme enda mer ut til våre medlemmer. Og vi registrerer jo da at du, Rolf, og Vestkast når ut til veldig mye av de samme folka. Så tanken vel gjerne at vi skal samarbeide og få til noe der som treffer medlemmene våre.
Norbrygg har jo gjort seg noen tanker om hva en sånn podcast skal inneholde.
Ja, det går jo selvfølgelig på det som interesserer bryggerne. Mye av det som også dere gjør og har gjort, jo også det. Der jo egne episoder på bruken av råvarer og metoder og ene med det andre. Så det vel egentlig i den leia vi ser for oss at vi skal få enda mer av det samme gode.
Ja, og så jo fordelen også at vi kan jo dekke og rapportere litt fra de forskjellige arrangementene som Norbrygg har. Og de blir det vel egentlig flere av nå fremover, blir det ikke det?
Ja, det vil jeg tro. Nå skal vi jo rett over påske i gang med hjemmebryggerhelga i Trondheim, som et av de årlige og sentralt organiserte arrangementer. I tillegg til det så vil det nok bli enda flere og enda mer synlige arrangement rundt om i Norge nå når vi har fått fylkeslagene opp å gå, og aktiviteten kommer opp derifra.
Ja, for det vel det som, hvis du skal oppsummere litt det som har skjedd, det har jo skjedd en slags omveltning eller utvikling i Norbrygg de siste årene. Hvis du kan si litt om det, og ikke minst hvordan du ser for deg fremtiden for Norbrygg under din jernharde ledelse.
Ja da, nå har jeg vært med i 1 år så langt. Og det året har vært preget av det som skjedde nå for 2 uker siden. Da hadde vi det første landsmøtet til Norbrygg i Oslo. Tidligere har det vært et årsmøte, altså et åpent årsmøte for alle medlemmer. Og så har vi jo hatt en ganske eksplosiv vekst i noen år, nærmest vel snart 5000 medlemmer, og på grunn av det så ser en også da behovet for en mer desentralisert modell, og dermed så nå fylkeslag innført. Nesten alle fylker nå oppe og går med egne styre og masse dyktige folk som vi fikk treffe på i Oslo. Og mye av det som jeg tenker fremover nå, som sentralstyrer av min jobb, blir jo å følge opp det som skjer ute. Være litt sånn støttende hand, og aller mest, skulle jeg si, ja, følge opp I stedet for å nødvendigvis være den som gjennomfører alle slags aktiviteter.
Så det på mange måter en desentralisering og demokratisering av organisasjonen eller dere holder på med nå?
Ja, det I aller høyeste grad. Jeg tror det som du sier om demokratisering veldig viktig. Desentralisering noe, altså, det har vel kanskje blitt oppfattet som litt sånn Oslo-tungt. Men det jo enda mer det at en får demokratisering, og en får høre alle sine stemmer inn. Fylker velger jo sine delegater, og en møtes da til et landsmøte som tar på en måte veien videre. Vi hadde jo en fin sånn arbeidsøkt også midt I landsmøtet, og jobba litt med arbeidsplanen for Norbrygg, og da får en jo virkelig høre hva alle rundt omkring tenker, og hva de gjør, og hva de har lyst til å få til.
Ja, for litt av tanken bak her med denne desentraliseringen jo å øke aktivitetene hos de forskjellige lokallagene, ikke det så?
Ja, altså I utgangspunktet så har jo ikke det vært noe lokallag tidligere. Noen plasser har jo hatt ølklubber og sånt, bryggerilaug og sånt som har vært sånn delvis tilknyttet. Men nå blir jo dette her mer formalisert over hele fjøla, og så vil en nok se mye bedre den aktiviteten som ute. Jeg vil tro at hele hjemmebrygger-Norge får mye større innblikk I hva som faktisk finnes og hva som faktisk skjer. Og kanskje kommer det også til å skje flere ting, altså at aktiviteten rett og slett øker. Fordi at en også vet om det.
Ja, for dette betyr jo også at de forskjellige lokallagene vil få en viss økonomi å rutte med, som kan gå til hjemmebryggerrelaterte aktiviteter.
Ja, det det. Nå deler ikke vi ut noe, men alle fylkeslagene kan nå budsjettere med en viss sum per medlem. Og dette her kan de jo da disponere og sette opp for å få aktiviteten opp. De kan jo leie inn foredragsholdere, de kan begå selvfølgelig litt til administrasjon også av fylkeslag, men der bør være midler til å kanskje få opp aktivitet som man ellers ikke hadde turt seg på, uten å ha en litt sterk økonomi I ryggen da.
Og dette må vel igjen bety at det vel et potensial for at medlemsantallet I Norbrygg kan enda øke en del?
Ja, det tror jeg absolutt. Jeg hørte noen forsiktig anslå at vi kanskje hadde 50 000 hjemmebryggere I Norge. Og vi I Norbrygg har 10% av disse her som medlemmer. Så jeg tror at når alle disse her 45 000 ser at ting begynner å skje rundt deg og aktiviteten blomstrer, så bør vi absolutt ha et potensial til å nå ut til enda flere.
Så når vi har neste prat om et års tid, så har vi I hvert fall doblet antallet, ikke det?
Ja, det skjedde I Norbrygg før at han har doblet I løpet av et år, så... Men vi skal ikke være for tøffe, vi må ta det litt sånn step by step, men jeg tror I hvert fall når vi prater igjen, så har det vokst litt, det her.
Men da tenker jeg at det på sin plass å starte første episode av Norkast med å høre litt på Jamil Zainasheff, ikke du enig?
Ja, veldig bra forslag.
Da gjør vi det. It shouldn't be necessary to introduce you, because most of the listeners of this podcast probably know who you are and read your books, but in case there is one.
I'm Jamil Zainasheff. I do podcasts on the Brewing Network. I do owner and brewer at Heretic Brewing Company, and I've written a couple of books, Brewing Classic Styles and Yeast Book.
And you are here in Sandnes at Sur og Bitter. You had two talks. The first one was about judging and beer styles. Can you just run us through what you were talking about and your points in your talk?
Well, let's see. I talked for over an hour until they cut me off. You know, the gist, I think, of what I was trying to say the other day was that judges are often taught to find flaws. The big problem is that because they are always looking for flaws, they are missing out on great beers. Or, you know, a judge that isn't too confident on themselves, that doesn't want to embarrass themselves at the table, will make up flaws because they come across a beer, they can't find any flaws in it, so they panic. And they tell themselves, okay, well, what flaw can I make up? You know, can I imagine is possibly there? They're hunting for it. And they come up with these flaws because they don't want to seem like they don't know what they're doing with the other judges. And so unnecessarily beers are dinged and taken down that have no flaws or that, you know, could be perfect beers. And yet judges are afraid to give something a perfect score. People are afraid to give beers a perfect score on Beer Advocate, Rate Beer, Untapped, any of those sites. They feel like if they give a beer a perfect score, something's wrong. There's people who are proud of themselves for having rated 5,000 beers and never given a perfect score. And what is it they are waiting for? What is it they imagine a perfect beer tastes like? My point is, you probably have perfect beers all the time, and you are missing out on that because you're trying to be too negative. I think people should be much more positive about what they enjoy, and they should be confident in what they enjoy, and state loudly that they love something.
But you think is it something wrong with the judges or with the definitions, the beer styles, the BACP things?
Well, the beer styles are crap. They are good, but they are crap. The very fact that we're trying to define something that is very dynamic and beer is very fluid, pardon the pun, and you can't, you know, the fault also of the judges is that, and this is a fault of the style guidelines, is that it becomes a style competition and not a brewing competition. Every time you hear about a competition, it's a brewing competition. You enter as a brewer to win a brewing competition for your brewing skill, and the award is for the best brewer, not for the best style maker. And so, unfortunately, a lot of times the judges, again, they're taught to look for the center of the style. And when something's on the edge of the style, that somehow has made it worse. Well, no, it's in the style. If it's in the style, if it could be considered somewhat in the right category, that should be enough. That's a yes or a no. Is it in or is it out? That should not determine if it's the best beer. The best beer should be brewed based on brewing skill. Was it the best brewed beer that is in the style? Yes or no on the style. Then you looked at the brewing quality. If you had two beers that were both equally flawlessly brewed, which rarely happens, and then you wanted to decide between those two, then I would say the one that just has the greatest harmony to it would be the winner. Not the one that's most central to the style. Again, style is yes or no. And I would argue anything that even on the edges of the style, if it's like, well, you know, it seems a little too dark or a little too hoppy or a little too this or a little too that, that's fine. It's still in the style. You cannot be so much of a Nazi about styles that is what's going to determine the world of beer. Beer is brewed, and styles are the the remora, the parasite on the world of beer. It's a necessary one. It has some use in that when we go to a pub and I want something hoppy. Oh, look, they've got all their IPAs categorized. The green ones are IPAs. All right, so I'm going to pick from a green one because I want something hoppy. Now, is it exactly the God's gift to IPA style? No, it may be extreme on one end or another. That's great, but it gives us a shorthand to talk about. So styles are useful, and I complain about them all the time because I think, and the reason I do is because people just cling to them as the end-all be-all of beer. And I don't think the people who write the style guidelines want that to happen. They don't want style guidelines determining what beers are brewed. They want to describe what beers are being brewed. So what beers are being brewed, that's the driver. The style guidelines are a discussion around it.
But there are guidelines.
Yes, guidelines. Not, they're, as my friend Gordon likes to say, they are descriptive, not prescriptive. You are not instructed to brew a certain type of beer in a certain way and make it taste this way. Then all the beers would taste the same. We don't want that. We want to, encourage people to understand the world of beer through beer styles. And that, I think, is a noble cause. Using that as a club to beat brewers over the head with is disgusting.
And it's also it gives us as brewers, home brewers, more freedom, doesn't it?
You have all the freedom in the world. Brew anything you want. You don't have to enter in competition. You don't have to share it with anybody else. You can brew everything you like and enjoy it.
As you have done for many years.
Yes, yeah. The part of the joy comes from sharing it with other people. It's like cooking a great meal. Do you cook for yourself and just enjoy it and sit there? No, you invite friends over, and when you've perfected something, you want them to taste it, and you want to see the look on their face when they go, "Ooh, that is fantastic," and the same thing for beer. And so it's a very social thing. So you can, retreat to your hole and do it yourself, or share it with people. And if they love it, they love it. If they don't, well, that's okay. Not everybody loves every food. Some people like spicy, some people don't. That's okay. It doesn't make them bad people. Doesn't make the food bad. It means people have different tastes, and that should be celebrated. That's why we have so many different, beers.
So if you were to judge the beer you have now in your glass.
You put me on the spot. Judge it in what way?
Like a beer judge.
Well, here's what a beer judge should do.
The ideal beer judge.
An ideal beer judge, in my opinion, should describe what it is they are detecting. They should say whether they detect any, the positives that they detect, any issues that they detect with the brewing, but they should not, tell somebody their beer is good or bad. They should not, tell somebody that they should add. You should have added, this kind of hop, or you should have added this, that, or the other thing, or you shouldn't have put this in there, because 9 times out of 10 they're wrong. What they should talk about is what they personally are detecting and appreciating. What I get from this is what I like to call a biscuit kind of malt, which works in the U.S., but the rest of the world goes more cracker-like, kind of a grainy, malty kind of character. I get a nice firm bitterness from it. I'm getting an earthy, fruity kind of hop character. You know, and by my saying those things, you cannot tell me I'm wrong. Because what I've told you is, well, here's what I'm tasting. Here's what I am detecting. And it's like if you said you were cold and I said I was hot. Neither one of us is wrong. You were talking about your personal experience, what you feel in your body, what I feel in my body. There's no way we can tell the other person that they are wrong in what they are feeling. You know, if you are happy with this interview or you're sad with this interview, I cannot tell you you are wrong. I can hope for a different result, but I cannot, tell you you should think a different way. And when you judge that way, when as a judge you just focus on what you are picking up, when you are just a machine that, thinks about the flavors and aromas, and then you can give it oh, I love this, or I didn't, or whatever, that's fine. That's really when you don't fail as a judge. When you try and become holier than the brewer, that's when you have problems.
But if you were judging a competition now, and this you were judging the double IPAs, so what's the score? You don't do much judging, do you?
I've done a lot of judging. This beer, since it is one of one, I would say is first place.
Hoppy and sour beers. About hoppy beers, we tasted your Evil Tree. I wonder if you just could walk us through how you make that beer, because it's a big beer, but it's really smooth, and the alcohol is not perceivable.
Right. So that beer, the Evil 3, is a collaboration with two dear friends of mine. One is Mitch Steele, who he used to be the head brewer at Stone. He's now gone off to open his own place out in Atlanta. And Tasty McDowell, who's a world-famous home brewer that we've been friends for a long time. And so the three of us, one day at a beer festival, Tasty said to the two of us, he's like, why don't we do a collaboration together? We've never done a collaboration. And we all looked at each other and we're like, yeah, we should do it. So I had just set up my new place in Fairfield, and I'm like, well, Mitch, when are you up this way? He goes, I'm up every Christmas to visit family. We're like, okay, let's do it. So we've done it now for 4 years. The three of us get together and brew this beer, which it changes every year. And I think each year it's gotten better and better. We've got it dialed in, and I've got one more change I want to do next year, and I think it'll be absolutely perfect. I think it's really, really good. So the beer is mainly just a raw 2-row malt called Alex. It comes from a place in Canada called a town called Alex. I don't know if they sell that in the rest of the country, but it's very prominent on the west coast of the U.S. It's got a great, very clean but slightly malty character to it that is great in American-style beers. We used mainly that. We used a small percentage of sugar. I think it's maybe 2.5% dextrose. Tasty wanted Pilsner malt in there and wheat malt in there, so there's a little bit of those. They both wanted crystal malt in there, so there's a little crystal malt in there. It was much more, and they were wrong, and I told them they were wrong, and so over the years we've dialed it down, and now they're much happier. But that's the thing about collaborations. You know, when you're with your friends, yeah. You know, where are we going to dinner? Well, I want to go to dinner here. Or no, I want this. And, you decide together. And in the end, you're together and you have a good time, and that's what was important, not where exactly did you eat and what the check was. It's really that experience, and that's what we get out of this beer. So, and this year we couldn't get the hops we wanted, so we changed up the hops to, I think, even better. We used Amarillo, Citra, and Simcoe. It's 40% Amarillo, 40% Simcoe, and 20%, what did I say? 40% Amarillo, 40% Citra, and 20% Simcoe. And then we do bittering with Apollo. And fermented with 001 yeast, California ale yeast from White Labs. And just a very skillful addition of yeast and nutrients and oxygen and temperature, and I think, it turns out making just ethanol, and you don't taste it because it's pretty much just ethanol.
But the mouthfeel?
Yeah, good mouthfeel, I think, but not too full. It's got a fullness to it. I'd like to reduce that just a tiny bit. I think it's a little too much still for me. It finishes out fairly dry. It finishes out at 10-10 to 10-12, about 2.5 to 3 Plato. And I think it just makes it so drinkable. It drinks like a lot of people's regular IPA. Yet at 11.5% and maximum IBUs, it's very smooth. So I think that when you can do something like that, it makes me very happy. I think it makes me very proud of what we're capable of doing at my brewery.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that. Yeah, you I suppose all the listeners knows about this, but you when did you start your brewery, Heretic Brewing?
We started May, and we brewed our first batch May 21st of 2011. So just about 6 years ago. And we've been doing really well and growing, and we keep brewing, and we're real happy with what we do. We've probably made 40 to 50 different beers at this point. So a lot of them never really get outside the tap room because the tap room just drinks them all up. But it's about a 45 hectoliter brewery, 4 vessels. So it's got a separate mash, lauter, kettle, and whirlpool. And we have 450 or more wine barrels from Napa that we use for our sours. Probably have about 200 barrels, bourbon barrels that we do for our bourbon barrel aged beers. And we added a distillery as well, just recently. So, as if I don't have too much work to do already, I've added more.
Yeah, about sours, we tasted your blackberry tartuffe.
Yes.
If you can walk us through that.
So the blackberry tartuffe, first off, tartuffe is an actual word in the English language. It actually comes from, I think, a French writer who wrote a story about it, but a tartuffe is a person who feigns religious virtue. A lot of times people think I made up the word. People think I made up the word heretic as well. But those are people that were educated in the American school system, so the Tartuffe is a Berliner Weiss, a kettled sour beer. So for that, we start mainly with just a base malt, and we run off a fairly low gravity beer into the kettle. We boil it for 15 minutes. A low gravity wort, 15 minutes in the kettle. To kill the grains are covered in bacteria and wild yeast. And if you do not kill that, it smells like your dog's butt very quickly. It smells like your dog's butt after your dog died. So we boil it for 15 minutes. That kills all that. And then we let it cool back down to about 37 degrees C. We will add a pure strain of bacteria. In our case, we use Plantarum. and it produces a really nice sour character in 24 hours. Then we boil it again to kill the bacteria, and then we add hops, and then we transfer it to the fermenter. We pitch our yeast, we ferment it. In this case, we also add blackberries. We get 1,000 pounds of about less than 500 kilos of locally grown blackberries from a really nice farm near us, and add that to the beer. That gives it that color and that great blackberry flavor.
You added post-fermentation then?
Yes, right. We wait for fermentation to be over. Towards the end of fermentation, there's still lots of yeast available, and the yeast will actually consume the fructose that's in the berries very easily. It's just a little snack for the yeast at the end. It's so low sugar compared to wort that it will.
But do
finish up
you
with.
pasteurize the berries?
No,
No.
we don't. We freeze them.
Uh-huh.
Mainly to help break down the cell walls to express the juice. But we really don't worry about contamination like that. What I've found is contamination in brewing often comes from other parts of the process where people are, pitching yeast, or they don't properly clean their vessels, or the valves or hoses or things like that. That's what's dirty. So I used to worry about it a lot, but what I've discovered from a lot of the additions that we do, whether it be the chocolate for the chocolate hazelnut porter, we use cocoa from a local chocolatier, and it's clean. We use hibiscus flowers for our Petite Rouge, and those hibiscus flowers, the acidity of the flowers themselves prevents bacteria and yeast from really getting a hold on them. So it's amazing that, a lot of these products exist, and one of the reasons that they're popular is because they're naturally resilient and resistant to bacteria and spoilage, and that's why they've become popular. And so when you use those, it actually works out pretty good. As far as the blackberry and the Berliner Weiss, blackberries can host, bacteria and yeast, but you freeze it, it kills most of that, and there isn't much sugar left in the Berliner Weiss for anything really to consume. There's not really much dextrins either, so it tends to not have a problem.
Using planetarium, what I noticed with this beer was that a lot of Berliner Weisses has this really lactic taste or flavor, which I don't like personally. But in this one, I couldn't find any. Is that because of the planetarium?
All right, the planetarium's making lactic acid. Yes, of the winner, the best in show beer. Yeast make lactic acid, and the planetarium make lactic acid. The thing is, there are so many other compounds that are being produced at the time that it's one of the reasons that we boil the wort before we add the planetarium. Because if you allow the stuff off the grain, it can be quite nasty. And the strains of, it's like using various strains of yeast. If you use an English yeast or a American yeast or a German lager yeast or something like that, or Hefeweizen yeast, they all have different characters. They're all yeasts, but they produce all this other, and they all produce alcohol. They all produce carbon dioxide. They all release water. It's all the other little compounds that they produce when they do that makes the overall character of what you're drinking. So it's the same thing with the planetarium. It produces these other compounds, but the compounds it produces are quite pleasant versus, so if you just take pure lactic acid, it has other stuff in it, and a lot of times it's not just lactic acid, it's all this other compounds. So being able to, select the creature that is producing lactic acid, that makes all the difference in the world.
You did talk a little bit about good advices for how to brew proper hoppy beers and proper sour beers.
I did?
You did. I didn't write them down, so I forgot them.
Okay.
No.
Well, I think, critical to hoppy beers is, fresh hops and the selection of hops. It's difficult on a homebrew level because you can't go to the farms and choose which hops you're going to use. On my scale, I'm able to do that, and that is, a significant advantage. The other thing is, how you balance your water, whether you want something, that's important, and then using a variety of hops and selecting the right yeast, because the yeast will take out hop character or it'll express hop character by taking out malt character. On sour beers, the most important thing to note is that it takes time to make a good sour beer. Kettle sours are fairly quick, but if you want to make a barrel-aged sour, the amount of oxygen, the temperature, the nutrients, the creatures that are involved, all those will really determine whether you have something that is very delicate and balanced and easy drinking, or something that tastes like you took a bottle of vinegar and mixed it with some paint thinner. Anything's possible. So it's about a lot of these little subtleties that really determine the character of the final beer.
Yeah, you said something about there are 4 really important points to remember when you make sours. Time, obviously, that's one of them.
Right. Now you put me on the spot here. I don't have my slide in front of me. Time, temperature, oxygen levels, and the substrates. So time, it just takes time for, the longer the time takes to make the sour beer, it tends to be a lot more character and a very smoother, more wonderful drink in the end. It isn't sharp or harsh. It's sour without being sharp or harsh. And a big part of that is temperature. It should never be past 68 Fahrenheit or 20 degrees C. It needs to be below that. Cooler tends to be better. It takes longer, but the end result is nicer. It's the same thing in regular fermentation. You have a really hot fermentation, it's full of really harsh alcohols, it's solventy, it's unpleasant. Same thing in souring. You just need to look over a longer period of time. So temperature, then oxygen, the type of barrel you use or the type of container you use, you want a very slow ingress of oxygen in there. So we tend to favor American oak barrels because they're a denser oak. French oak are good. The Hungarian I haven't used a lot of, but we tend to use a mix of French and American oak. The American oak will have a really nice, clean, sour, profile to them. Sometimes not quite sour enough, and so we use some French barrels. And the French can be a little bit more harsh, or a little sharper, and we'll do a mix of those, and it's quite nice. As far as the substrate, the barrels themselves provide a substrate for the Brettanomyces can actually consume wood, so that's a nutrient source for them. And then also the yeast you use to initially ferment the wort, you want to provide some phenols for the Brettanomyces to turn into some of these funky flavors. So you use a phenol positive yeast, like a Belgian ale yeast that will produce some of those phenols, and they will provide a substrate for the Brettanomyces to work on, as well as you want some long chain sugars, you want some dextrin starches for the Brett to consume as well.
We have to talk about New England IPAs.
Okay, what about them?
Yeah, what about them?
I think that there are some great ones, And I think that the majority of the examples people are brewing are really pretty horrible and doing New England IPA a disservice. Just because a beer is hazy does not make it a New England IPA. It can, most of the time, it means it's crap. And a great New England IPA to me is very similar in a way to Belgian wit beer, believe it or not. You know, people are trying to compare it to other IPAs, and it just dawned on me it's actually closer to Belgian wit beer, because a great Belgian wit beer will have this great pillowy mouthfeel and softness and character to it that makes it just so luscious to drink. You know, it's not sharp, it's not harsh. There's plenty of examples that those are bad wit beers, but the good wit beers are like that. A good New England IPA is not extremely bitter. It's actually just slightly on the bitter side of balanced. It is more focused on that mouthfeel and the flavor and the aroma of hops, which in a New England IPA is more tropical, citrusy, and fruity. People will say juicy, and it's that combination that makes it a very easy drinking, soft, fruity beer. It's not harsh. It's not biting. If the yeast falls to the bottom of the glass and you're short 20% of your beer because it's just a slug of yeast in the bottom, that's a bad New England IPA. If it is so sharp and biting and harsh that you question whether your teeth have dissolved, that's a bad New England IPA. It should be, again, soft. It should be, very fruity. It should be, easy drinking. It should have a bitterness, but just a balancing bitterness, or slightly more bitter than balanced. That's a great New England IPA. And I think there are brilliant examples of them. I was just in Boston before this trip. Trillium, making some great New England IPA. I would say that's, the gold standard right there. But I've also, on similar trips to Boston, been served crap that they charged me $10 for a 10-ounce pour, and 2 ounces of it was yeast. I think that's criminal. And just because something's hazy does not make it a great New England IPA. And I am sick and tired of people, presenting that as good beer. That I find very offensive. So, and I think it does a disservice to New England IPA. People think I hate New England IPA. I hate bad New England IPA. I don't know how else to express this, but people think I'm somehow bashing on them. What I'm saying is, there's people making horrible versions, and people are just exclaiming how awesome they are, and I don't think they really understand what great ones are. They just see it's hazy and say, "Oh, that's great New England IPA." No, New England IPA is far beyond the haze. The haze is not New England IPA. It's the flavor profile. You should be able to close your eyes and taste a New England IPA in a beer.
But the best one I've tasted, they had this incredible mouthfeel, really like silky. And that, as far as my experience,
absolutely, yeah. Silky, pillowy,
yeah.
Yes, yes.
But how to get that when you're brewing in your kitchen 20 liters?
Well, a lot of it is the proteins. The way that we do it is we don't do any kettle fining. We don't do any fermenter fining, and the proteins, if you're using a quality malt, and
dextrose, is that a trick?
No. Dextrose will thin it out. Dextrin powder, maltodextrin. I guess people add that. People add oats. They add things that have a high glucose level. That will help as well. Yeah. We don't tend to add maltodextrin when we do it. We use oats. We'll use wheat, and then we don't do any fining whatsoever, and then all the hops are at the end of the whirlpool and in dry hopping. There's no bittering hops added.
Yeah, I was thinking, when you made Brewing Classic styles, you actually brewed and entered into competition and won every single style. So with Heretic, are you going to brew every single style and brew the best beer ever?
Well, I don't know that we're going to brew the best beer ever. That certainly is the intent.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to say that we're capable of doing that, because that would be way too egotistical. I would say that we would love to do that, but and really we don't have any plan, or it's very, Heretic is very much a homebrew type of brewery, where when people ask me, they're like, well, do you homebrew anymore? I'm like, well, yeah, every day at Heretic, where we treat it more, I mean, everybody that works for me is a homebrewer, or at least in the brewery is a homebrewer. Has been, that's their passion. And we want to make great beer. And so we come up with ideas, sometimes crazy ideas, and we just do different things like a homebrewer does. We don't have like, well, market analysis says, we need this, that, the other thing. We don't do any of that. We don't really care one way. We want to make a great beer that we like, that we're excited about. And if it sells, great. Go ahead and sell it. If it doesn't sell, that's fine. We'll drink it. We'll brew another one. And so we just have a lot of fun and creative time trying to make the best beer possible. And so even the beers that become part of the permanent lineup, the ones that sell really well, we are constantly trying to perfect them. So the interesting thing about beer is everybody expects beer to always be exactly the same. With wine, everyone's like, oh, it's a different varietal. It's a different year. It's a different, vintage. And with beer, they ignore the fact that with the vintage on wine, one ingredient changed, the grapes, right? With beer, that your malt changes every year, your hops change every year, right? You have two ingredients that are changing, and yet they still expect you to brew exactly the same beer every time. It's tricky. So we do manipulations of the beer, and the distributors, they freak out if they know you're changing the beer. And so I stopped telling them. I just change the beer all I want. We actually changed all our beers over. We had a problem with a malt supplier, so we changed all our beers over about 3 years in to a different set of malts. And everyone's like, well, how do you do that? It's like, well, no, we know what we're doing. We know, and the beers became better. And so we've really, what we want to provide is the best beer possible. Does that mean the beer may change over time? Absolutely. We're not making the same beer we did 6 years ago. Yep. We want every beer to be better and better. Every batch, I tell my guys, either a beer, my guys and gals, I tell my people that every time we brew a beer, that beer is either getting better or it's getting worse. It never stays the same. There's so many little things, and so every time we make a choice, that choice has to be that the beer is getting better. We can't.
But still, when you learn how to brew, you get told this thing about this constant nagging about consistency.
Oh, right. Well, I think if you can't brew this if you're given the same ingredients, let's say you buy a large batch of ingredients, enough to brew 10 batches of beer. If you cannot brew 10 batches, and then in a blind tasting, have people say, well, I can't tell the difference between them, then you don't have control of your brewing process. That's what you should be able to do. It's far more difficult than you would think. And most brewers can't do it.
what's the best? What's the trick? What's your advice?
Practice, lots and lots of practice. Attention to fine details. When you know the where you set a valve open to close, the amount of time before you open that valve or close that valve. You know, was the temperature rising slowly before it reached your mash out? Was it rising quickly? You know, exactly the exact details, every last little tiny thing makes a difference, and especially in fermentation. Vast attention to detail on fermentation. Wort production isn't as important.
And take notes, probably.
Yeah, take notes, but you know, be very, very specific about what's going on. That, you know, and if you can't brew with 2 batches of ingredients, the same, you know, the same ingredients, you can't brew 2 batches of beer and have them taste the same where you can't tell the difference in a blind triangle, then you just don't have control of your brewing.
But what it comes down to is to have fun, isn't it?
Yes. Sometimes people have fun by being very, what we call anal about things, or worrying about things and having them turn out great. That's how people have fun. So they have fun by worrying about something. And yeah.
Well, anything more you want to add?
I've had a great time in Norway, and I appreciate the fact that you care enough to do the podcast, and that there's a great beer festival like this here that was interested in having me come and speak. I really love it. I think the beer world is just amazing, and the quality of beers that I've tasted, just amazing. It's a great experience, and I think you know, more people should travel. More people should learn about you know, what's going on elsewhere. I think sometimes people get very closed-minded, and that is unfortunate.
What's your impression of the Norwegian beer scene?
All I've seen is just the festival here, and I've tried to drink, you know, Norwegian beers only, but I think, you know, a lot of them are great. Really, really good stuff. Yeah. I was very impressed with the homebrew shop out in Stavanger. What a clean, big homebrew shop with great selection of materials there and high-end stuff. You guys aren't messing around out here in this country. You're serious about your brewing. If you're supporting a shop like that, and they've got a selection of high-quality stuff. I mean, the hop selection would put most homebrew shops in the U.S. to shame. The equipment selection, the yeast selection, I was very impressed. I was like, man, these guys, I don't know if they're doing well or not, but I'm like, that's a good homebrew shop. Very impressive, very impressive. You don't see that in the U.S. all the time.
Cool. Thanks a lot for taking the time, Jamil.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'd love to do it again.
Du har hørt på Norkast episode 1. Norkast er hjemmebryggerorganisasjonen Norbryggs egen podcast for hjemmebryggere. Er du ikke medlem av Norbrygg, sier du? Da går du inn på norbrygg.no og melder deg inn, og sjekker ut alle de medlemsfordelene du får der, og ikke minst sjekk ut Norbryggs eget forum. Denne episoden er produsert av Spacecraft Produksjoner og er laget av Rolf Bergesen.